was caught. The next day in the newspaper, the guy described my car, but it wasn't my car. And I figured I got away with it.
An 84-year-old man answers a knock at his assisted living apartment door, sees two investigators standing in the hallway, and before either of them says a single word, his face gives it away. He was not surprised or confused. The investigators didn't come with handcuffs yet. They came with a question first, and when they laid the evidence on the table before him, he stopped denying it and told them everything, calmly. What those investigators had just cracked was one of Wisconsin's oldest cold cases. This murder happened in a rural snowbank in February of 1974, when a 25-year-old woman named Mary Schlais climbed into the wrong car on her way to an art show and never made it another mile down the road. The confirmation of the killer's identity came on a specific date, November 4th, 2024, which would have been Mary's 76th birthday. This is how a winter hat, sitting in an evidence locker for half a century, brought a murderer to justice. Mary Kathleen Schlais grew up in Champlin, Minnesota, and by the time she was in her mid-20s, she had already lived a life that most people only dream about. She was the kind of person who collected skills the way other people collect hobbies. She graduated with honors in art from the University of Minnesota in 1973. She had work displayed at the Women's Institute for Social Change and was already working toward her master's degree when she died. She spoke Dutch, German, and English fluently, and had recently started studying Japanese. She was adventurous in the way that a lot of young people were in the early 1970s. She hitchhiked across the Midwest and through Europe, combining travel with her passion for art, and it had never once gone wrong. So on the morning of February 15th, 1974, when she decided to hitchhike from Minneapolis to an art show in Chicago, there was no reason in her mind to think this trip would be any different from the dozens that came before it. She left her uptown Minneapolis apartment at around 10:30 in the morning, wearing a tan fur-lined coat over a maroon turtleneck and jeans, carrying her purse in a small cardboard sign that read Madison, her first stop on the way south. Her roommate Judith saw her walk out the door. Less than 3 hours later, Mary was dead in a ditch in Dunn County, Wisconsin, 90 miles from where she'd started. A local man was out driving with his dog that afternoon on a dead-end road near Elk Creek Lake in Spring Brook Township when he noticed a gold compact car parked along the shoulder with a man standing at the passenger side. As he drove past, the two made eye contact, and something about the expression on the man's face, a strange mix of surprise and anger that didn't sit right. He kept driving, but the unease kept building, so he turned around and came back. By the time he returned, the car was gone, but he could see tire tracks in the snow and what the driver had apparently been pulling from the vehicle. A young woman, face down, not moving. He went to a nearby house and called the Dunn County Sheriff's Department. When investigators arrived, they found that Mary's body was still warm, meaning the attack had happened within the last hour. The autopsy confirmed she had been stabbed between 13 and 15 times in her neck, back, and chest, that her nose had been broken, and that she had defensive cuts across both hands from trying to block the blade. She had also scratched her attacker hard enough to leave blood and skin cells under her fingernails, which investigators carefully preserved. Right next to her body was an orange and black stocking cap. It wasn't Mary's. Nobody at the scene knew whose it was, but investigators collected it, along with the hairs found inside, and logged everything into evidence. Tire tracks were photographed and measured, but the cold made casting them impossible, so the thread snapped quickly. Witness descriptions of the suspect described a white man, 5 feet 8 to 6 feet tall, with light brown or hazel eyes, a thick mustache, somewhere in his late 20s to mid-30s, driving a gold compact car. It was something, but not nearly enough. The investigation that followed was thorough. Around 100 formal interviews, multiple photo lineups, and investigators even hypnotized the key eyewitness twice, hoping to pull out some buried detail. However, nothing new surfaced. One name drifted into the picture at some point, Randall Woodfield, who would later become infamous as the I-5 killer. He had been traveling from Portland to Green Bay around the time of Mary's death and matched the physical description. Investigators looked at him, found nothing connecting him to the case, and moved on. Without usable tire track casts, without a suspect, and with biological evidence that 1974 science had no framework to decode, the case ran out of road. It was declared cold, though the Dunn County Sheriff's Department kept it open and kept following up on new tips across the years. The stocking cap and the hair samples stayed in the evidence locker. They always believed those hairs would matter eventually. While Mary's family spent the following decades without answers, the man who killed her went on living what looked, from the outside, like an ordinary life. John Keith Miller was born on May 2, 1940, and by February 1974, he was 33 years old, with a criminal history most people in his life probably didn't know about. He had 2 forgery convictions from 1959 and 1960, served time at the Minnesota State Reformatory for Men in St. Cloud, and was released from California's San Quentin State Prison as recently as May 1972, less than 2 years before he crossed paths with Mary Schlais. By 1973, he had moved back to the Minneapolis area and recently remarried, presenting himself outwardly as a man starting fresh. On the morning of February 15, 1974, Miller was driving through uptown Minneapolis when he spotted Mary hitchhiking and stopped. She got in. At some point during the drive, he made a sexual advance toward her. She refused. And when she refused, he reached for a knife he kept stashed in the car's sun visor and stabbed her in the back, continuing until she stopped moving, then drove to the dead-end road in Spring Brook to hide the body, but panicked when he saw another car coming and left her in the ditch, driving away fast. He didn't realize until later that he'd left his stocking cap behind. After 1974, his documented record is almost startlingly thin: a DUI in 1994 and a minor drug paraphernalia charge in Iowa in 2014. He drifted around the upper Midwest for decades, eventually settling in Austin, Minnesota, where his apartment sat directly across the street from the local police department, and then, just months before his arrest, moving into an assisted living facility in Owatonna. He was, by every outward measure, just an old man living quietly, and for 50 years, that was enough. Consumer DNA ancestry companies had been building enormous databases for years, and when law enforcement began figuring out how to use them for cold cases, the logic was elegant. If a relative of a perpetrator had voluntarily submitted their DNA to one of those platforms to trace their family history, a partial genetic match to crime scene evidence might lead investigators backward through a family tree toward the source. It's the method that identified the Golden State Killer in 2018, and it has unlocked cases that once seemed permanently sealed. In late 2022, the Dunn County Sheriff's Office partnered with the Investigative Genetic Genealogy Center at Ramapo College in New Jersey, a team that collaborates with agencies that often can't absorb private lab costs. And by the spring of 2023, with the Wisconsin State Crime Lab also involved, the team officially began working on Mary's case. The hairs from the stocking cap were their starting point. A partial male DNA profile was extracted and submitted to genealogical databases, and the search began. By January 2024, a possible family line had been identified, and investigators began making contact with specific individuals. The first was a man in Wyoming. He cooperated, provided a DNA sample, and was ruled out. The second lead went to a man in Michigan. Same process, same result. Both men were genetically close to the crime scene profile, but neither was the match, and the team was stuck. Then came the pivot that broke the case open. What if the contributor had been adopted? Adoption would explain why the profile kept pointing to this family line without matching anyone in it. An adopted person carries their biological family's genetics, but won't appear in records traced through birth and marriage documents. The IGG team ran with it, and it led them to a woman identified only as TE in court documents, whose ancestry platform submission suggested her biological father could be the source. Investigators found her, explained what they needed, and she agreed to provide a sample. When the Wisconsin State Crime Lab returned results, it was conclusive. The DNA from the hairs in the stocking cap belonged to TE's biological father. Her mother confirmed that she had been married to a man named John Keith Miller from 1973 through 1977. The IGG Center officially confirmed the match and handed police their suspect on November 4, 2024, what would have been Mary Schlais' 76th birthday. 3 days later, investigators Dan Westland and Jason Stocker from the Dunn County Sheriff's Office drove to Miller's apartment in Owatonna and knocked on his door. Miller later told investigators that the moment he opened it, he knew exactly why they were there. He denied it at first, which was expected, but when investigators laid out the evidence, the DNA profile, the genealogical chain running from his daughter directly back to him, and a photograph of the orange and black stocking cap that had been sitting in an evidence locker since 1974. He went quiet, and then he started talking. He described picking Mary up in Minneapolis and recounted everything that happened that night. When investigators showed him the photograph of the stocking cap, he confirmed that it was his. Miller was arrested immediately and held at Steele County Jail while extradition to Wisconsin was processed. First-degree murder charges were filed the same day. Sheriff Kevin Bigd held a press conference the following morning and said something that stuck with me. He said that for anyone with a conscience, carrying what Miller had carried for 50 years must have been on his mind nearly every day. Whether Miller had a conscience is for him to reckon with, but he confessed calmly, and the sheriff's reading on it seems fair. On March 27, 2025, John Keith Miller pleaded no contest in a Dunn County courtroom and was sentenced to life in prison. He is currently serving that sentence at the Dodge Correctional Facility in Wisconsin at 84 years old. For the Schlais family, the resolution brought something that doesn't have a clean name, something heavier and more complicated than relief or closure. Mary's brother Don responded to the arrest with a line that I keep coming back to. He said he thought he was too old to feel much of anything anymore. That's what 50 years of unanswered grief does to a person. Mary's niece Nina, who was born after her aunt's death and grew up with Mary as a name and a photograph rather than someone she actually knew, spoke at sentencing and said that justice truly has no time limit and that the family could finally breathe again. And Mary Schlais, who was born on November 4th, 1948, and who deserved to live the rest of her life, finally has justice. If this case is new to you, or you've always wanted to discuss something about it, feel free to leave a comment. Subscribing means you'll get notified of the next video. Thanks for watching all the way through. See you guys.